Hello everyone, it's Elle from Vegan FTA here, and I'm here with very special guest Debug Your Brain, Justin. Hello, how are you, Justin?
Good, good. Always good to be here with you.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you. We haven't spoken in a while, and I thought that you are a really important person to the movement, and the things that you bring to the table can be really valuable. So the more people who know about what you do, I think the better. So it'd be worthwhile introducing yourself and what you do within the vegan community.
Yeah, sure. I guess I do a lot of stuff. So my name is Justin. I run the YouTube channel Debug Your Brain and various other social media accounts by that same name. So part of what I do is I do video essays, so tackling sort of the more nitty gritty topics of veganism. Crop deaths is the one that I'm apparently known for at this point. I have a very like 3-part, very long, in-depth series about crop deaths. I go out and I do street activism. I've been trying to do a little more systemic style activism. I have a local animal rights group here in North Carolina that I work with on some things. I really want to get some ASAP chapters started at the local colleges around here. So for people who don't know, ASAP is Allied Scholars for Animal Protection. It's an organization run by Dr. Faraz Harsini, and his goal is to basically get animal rights organizations at all the major colleges in the US, and so to have these sustainable core, these organizations that just hang out there, because what he's seen is that animal rights organizations will kind of like have this sort of roller coaster pattern where they'll be like very active for 1 year, then they'll fade out, then they'll be really active, then they'll fade out because of course people graduate. So those are probably my three main big areas: is video essays, street outreach myself, and then trying to maybe push for some more systemic change, possibly at like the collegiate level, maybe at governmental level. I haven't dug into that too much, but I am working with some people in my local animal rights group on that as well.
That's fantastic. And you said you're known for your crop death videos. What compelled you to make a video about the crop death specifically?
Yeah, so I think that generally, I think most arguments against veganism are like laughably bad, so much so that you can like dismiss them in like half a sentence or so.
Yeah.
And I think crop deaths is a little bit harder to dismiss in one sentence, like in an obvious way. So, like, for instance, if someone's like, well, we've always been doing this, so we can keep doing it. And you just go, well, wait, so is the fact that we've been doing something for a long time, is that a good justification for it? Can you think of other things that we did for a long time that, weren't good morally, ethically, they weren't good scientifically, and so you can put like an appeal to culture and appeal to tradition to bed like pretty quickly in one sentence. It's a little harder to do with crop deaths, and it's especially harder to do because people come at the answer to crop deaths from different perspectives, because people kind of operate on slightly different normative ethical theories. So one thing I wanted to do is kind of address the different normative ethical theories that were relevant to addressing crop deaths. And then also I wanted to dive deeper into like the math and science of it, because sometimes you'll hear people say, actually more crop deaths occur in animal agriculture because, of course, we have to feed animals crops, obviously, and they don't convert those crops efficiently. But then there would be this follow-up like, oh, well, we only feed animals waste, so actually there's less crop deaths there. And so I kind of wanted to address that in video form, and it's kind of hard. Like I probably can't even explain it here without the aid of video and like math and numbers popping up on the screen. And so the reason I wanted to do a video on that rather than just like show me doing outreach, answering that question, is because I think to really understand the way that works, the way that like more crops are fed to animals, with that objection in mind, you really do need like a visual component. And so that's kind of the thing with a lot of my videos, is that I think the visual component helps. And it also helps not merely to debunk the argument, but also to teach people. So I think plenty of people hear these, the vegan debunk, the anti-vegan debunk, and they just kind of maybe parrot them, or they don't have like a really deep understanding of the debunk, or why why this response works and this one doesn't. And so I think with those deeper video essays, you can definitely dive in more and sort of teach people to make sure that they actually have a true understanding of it. And they're not just parroting they're not just parroting the vegan debunk. Because if you're just parroting the debunks and someone then drills down a little deeper on you, then you're going to be like, oh, well, I don't actually know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I don't want that. I want people to actually have a deep understanding rather than just like a soundbite.
This response is testament to why I think you're so valuable to the movement, because your attention to detail when it comes to these things, like making sure that we have robust arguments, that we know what we're talking about, because we get so much don't want to like dismiss it as hate, but we get so much slack from people as vegans and scrutiny that it's so important to be ready, as you say, to like in detail actually go through these arguments. So you know, with that in mind, I actually don't think I know the answer to this question. Like, what compelled you to go vegan? How did that all begin?
Yeah, I mean, the question of how did it begin is always an interesting question.
It's
So,
true.
like, I would say there's like a very proximate cause of my veganism, but then there's like these more like sort of distal causes that are further back in time. So, like, the most obvious proximate cause was that during the pandemic, I started watching Earthling Ed debate videos, like his street outreach. So I'm someone who just like, I enjoy watching debate videos on all sorts of topics, political topics, religion is a favorite of mine. And so I just I get fed debate topics as part of the algorithm that just aren't even related to whatever it is I was watching, because the algorithm is just like, we know you like debates. And so it started feeding me these Earthling Ed vegan debates at some point. And I don't even remember why. I don't remember like what the first video I clicked on was. I just remember at some point, wow, I watched like 50 of these videos, you know, as a non-vegan. And so I think what really compelled me there was that I was noticing that the intelligence of the people he was interviewing, there was a big mismatch between their intelligence and the answers they were giving. So the justifications they were giving for non-veganism. So in other words, it seemed like these people were relatively intelligent individuals. You know, you can kind of judge that a bit by sentence structure, vocabulary, just like where they are. I'm like, these seem like decently smart individuals that he's interviewing. And then the reasons they were giving were absolute trash. You know, the justifications were just such garbage. And so that sort of like put a little like pebble in my shoe. You know, I think they say that in like street epistemology, because typically when someone's doing that, they're doing it as a sort of like defense mechanism, right? Like if your reasoning all of a sudden just starts turning absolutely terrible, typically that means that you're probably like defending something that isn't right. You know what I mean? Or you're feeling some sort of cognitive dissonance. And so that immediately like put me in a mindset of like, oh, that's an interesting observation to see that, you know, this vegan is going out here and talking to all these non-vegans, and they're just giving like really bad reasons. And they're giving them, it's not just that they're giving them very confidently. You know what I mean? It's like there's so much confidence behind this obviously terrible reason. And so it made me think like, well, what reasons do I have? Like, do I feel particularly confident that I have a strong argument against veganism? And the answer was I just didn't. You know, I mean, I can make arguments. I can make arguments for basically anything. Like I'll play devil's advocate of any side. But the point is that I didn't think the arguments I had were better than the opposing arguments on the vegan side. And you know, too, like also there were just some things that I didn't know or I hadn't thought about before that in watching those debates, it kind of cleared up for me, you know. And so I think that was the big thing that really started getting like my mind rolling on it. But then I had heard like a couple really important comparisons. You know, there was obviously Holocaust comparisons, there were slavery comparisons, and I think that, and there was actually an interesting thing that happened is I was watching Hench Herbivore once, and he referred to eating animals as eating animal body parts, and I remember like it was just like, ooh. Like, and I felt myself like almost want to be like, wow, that's very biased to call them animal body parts. Like I felt my brain wanting to do that. And I was like, that's just like a completely objective description
of what it is.
Of what, yeah. That's like it's almost as objective as you can get, animal body parts. And I felt that little, that tug, and it was like, and just then thinking about it as animal body parts, I'm like, yes, that's what I'm eating, you know, that's who I'm eating in this case. And I remember those things kind of coalesced, and I think they were that final emotional push that I needed. Like when I was watching Earthling Ed, it kind of put that pebble in my shoe and got me thinking about it more, like as a thing to actually consider. But I think it was a combination of those, you know, these really harsh analogies, and this like slight change in language that was that final emotional, just like tipped me over the edge, you know. As far as more like distal motivations, like I think back and there's a couple like, and I wasn't aware of these for a little bit actually, until I meditated more on this. But like one thing that happened when I was very young, very young by my standards now, I was in high school. So I think I was like maybe 16 or 17. And I don't know, Michael Vick, I guess, had gotten convicted of dog fighting. And my parents were just like positively, you know, angry about this. My dad in particular was just like, I can't believe this. This is such, you know, this is totally unacceptable. And at the time I was like, I was like, is it though? I was like, I mean, we're eating animals. Like we're literally killing them and eating them, and we like eat a bunch of them every day. Like, so is it that messed up? Like, I don't know. It seems kind of weird. And dude, my parents, especially my dad, they just got so angry at that. They were like it was so weird how angry they got at that response. You know what I mean? Like they were like, no, that's not the same at all. This is like completely different, blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of dropped. I was like, all right, whatever. And I think I had that conversation and none of my friends were around. So it was just me and them. And so there was no like follow up. There was no like, oh, I'm going to talk to my friends, see what they think about it. And it just kind of got dropped, right? Mm-hmm. Because of course that's uncomfortable to think about, because then I'm like, well, I'm always looking for inconsistency, right? Like I'm like, it's always been a big thing for me, like be consistent, like as consistent as is possible. No one can be fully consistent. And so when they said that, I was like, well, this just is an inconsistent position. And at that time, I basically kind of held the position that dogfighting wasn't a problem or it wasn't as problematic as like people were acting like it was, because I was like, this is like, it's the problem with only caring about consistency. Mm-hmm. Consistency tells you should view two things the same way. And so you can either say, well, dogfighting is wrong, then eating animals is very wrong. Or you can go the other way, like I did in the moment, which was like, well, I guess dogfighting isn't wrong. You know?
Well, I'm glad that you decided to go the other way. And that was the shift. And it's really good to see somebody who's like feeling the tug. You know, I can relate to that feeling of like when something's making me uncomfortable, it's like, something's going on here. And that's really important to pay attention to. And you pay attention to a lot of the things that are going on in the moment. And namely with your outreach, you'll do this thing where you put pointers of what's happening in the moment and different psychological terms, and you'll go through what you could have done better. Like, why specifically do you decide to do that instead of just leaving the video to speak for itself?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons for that. So one is I think there is a real, I don't know if I'd say surplus, but there are a lot of videos online of outreach. You know, there's two huge people, Joey and Ed, who just have endless outreach videos, but there's a ton of small channels who also do outreach videos as well. Like the total number of vegan outreach videos currently on YouTube, I don't even know. Like I'm not sure what it is. Like 10,000, 15,000, maybe. I'm not sure. Maybe that's an overestimate. But there's plenty of outreach videos if you want to see outreach videos, and those are great. I think people should keep making them. Please keep making outreach videos. Please keep outreaching to people. But I hadn't seen anyone do this before, and I hadn't seen anyone really like break down their outreach, other than to. Most of the outreach breakdowns I've seen are like on live streams or reactions. And most of the time what people are doing is telling, like they're giving more context as to why the non-vegan is giving a bad argument. Like maybe they'll explain, oh, that's an appeal to tradition. That's an appeal to nature. Or, wow, that person would never hold the same standard in the human context or in the context of dogs. You know, that's what most of it was, which is great. Also need that. But I didn't see a lot of people actually digging more into like what makes effective communication and like what makes effective outreach, like what is going to reach people, what is going to keep them from getting defensive, what is going to make them sort of work for the information rather than merely giving them the information, you know? And to me, that just seemed really underserved. And so I was like, well, even if I do a shitty job of this, it's still better than anything else that's out there, because there's nothing else out there that does this really that I've seen. There's kind of like more like broad scale things where people will like give like an hour-long talk or maybe an essay about like how to do outreach. I've seen a couple things like that, but very few things that are like breaking it down in the moment. And so part of it is just like, so it's just underserved. It's an underserved niche that I thought would be valuable to people. But the other thing is I want to help vegans get better at doing outreach, or see possible ways that they could do outreach differently. Maybe they try it and they don't like it as much, but it at least gave them something to sort of like latch onto and sort of get creative with, play jazz with themselves. And two, I just want to encourage people to get out there and be active. And I think that a lot from the videos that get popular online tend to be the videos that are the most combative. And even the ones that aren't super combative, just the people are giving a lot of excuses. Like they give 10 excuses, 15 excuses, just like excuse after excuse after excuse. And it's like excuse, debunk, excuse, debunk, excuse, debunk, right? And those are very compelling for us to watch, of course. The problem though is that I don't think that's how most outreach goes. At least that's not how most outreach that I've gone out
No.
and do
No.
goes. And so I didn't know that at first. I was like kind of nervous. I was like trying to like, I'm like had every, debunk memorized. And I went out there kind of like nervous, like, oh God, like how many are they going to say? Like, and I got out there and my first day, like I think I talked to like 3 or 4 people and they were all like super reasonable.
Yeah.
Like the harshest pushback I got was like, but do I really make a difference? Like they weren't like, no, this isn't wrong, or like this is totally fine, like animals, whatever. Or even like making like canines though sort of excuses. Like it was like, okay, this is bad, but like, do I actually make a difference? Like I don't see like what me, that was the harshest I got. And I came home and I was like, damn, that was actually pretty easy. Like that was not as hard as I thought, or as hard as YouTube videos would have led me to believe.
Mhm.
And so I thought it was important to kind of show that, like show like what I'm thinking in the moment, and things that kind of make it easier, like things that make those interactions go smoother. Because in a lot of the videos I watched, when people were getting super combative, it was like I saw very obvious things that the activist was doing that was driving up the anxiety and the defensiveness of the person they were talking to.
Yeah.
Which again, everyone has different styles. That's fine. I think it's particularly good if you're trying to get views on YouTube, which is like a strategy in and of itself. But I think if what you're trying to do is just go out and talk to a person and get the best interaction with them and the best chance of them walking away and being like, okay, vegans are more intelligent than I thought. Vegans aren't just like totally out to lunch and all this stuff. I really do have to think about this now. That's like, that was an interesting point. Like if that's what you want, if you want the person to actually like leave with a good impression of veganism, and with some really hard questions to grapple with, then I don't think the best way is to just like get them super off and defensive, So that's kind of what I was trying to do, is to show that there is this other way. And I think a lot of people who are already active already knew that, but I wasn't active and I didn't know that. And that made me think, well, I'm sure there's a bunch of other people who are on the verge of getting active or who could get active, but they're just thinking, man, this is too much of a hassle. I do not feel like dealing with assholes, And I think particularly online, it's even more like not disorienting, but misleading, because online, the people who push back on you are like the most inveterate douchey trolls there are, with the comments on YouTube videos and like, I guess to a lesser degree, Instagram. And I don't, not so much anymore, but good God, on TikTok, if you posted something on TikTok, it was just straight up cancer. And so like, it's very easy to think like, oh, if I go out and talk to people, this is the distribution I'm going to see. That's what your brain is. It's a pattern recognition machine. And so you're seeing all the hits, but you're not seeing all the misses. You're not seeing all those people who watched your video and were like, oh, that was kind of a good point. Or all the people who didn't comment. You know what I mean? Like you can look at the view to comment ratio and you can like math it out in your head and logically think, oh, I guess most people actually weren't that mad about it. But that's like not how your brain works intuitively. You're looking at it and you get like 6 just completely trash comments. And you're like, oh, humanity is horrible. They're trash. And if I go out in the street, I'm just going to be dealing with the worst people in the world. And so that's partially an answer about why I put those things, those little, I don't know what you would call them, like tips or insights or just commentary in my video. But it's also why I try to post these conversations that do go very well, to show you like conversations can go like this and do go like this and frequently go like this. And so like you can get out there and have good conversations with people and walk away feeling good after them, not like you want to go like smash your head into a brick wall. So.
Yeah, I think that is a really good thing. Yeah, it's very intimidating as it is for a lot of people to just go out and speak to people. So that's already a bridge to gap before you get to the point that you're seeing, oh my goodness, have I got to be prepared for all these debunks that I'm going to need to do. Another thing that I find really interesting about what you do is you implement, as I said previously, like psychological terms and psychology into your video essays. You do it in your outreach as well. This may seem like quite an obvious question, but why do you think it's so important to implement psychological terms and psychology into what you're doing when it comes to outreach?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to win hearts and minds, right? like at the very base, like we can make systemic change, but like we need some base of support to make that systemic change. And to do that, you have to win hearts and minds. And if you're trying to win minds, understanding psychology is a pretty good thing to have a grasp on, I would say. So one is just strategic, right? Like what convinces people, what's persuasive, how do people change their minds is this question, right? And so there's a lot of the psychological terms are trying to address how people change their minds, but it's also trying to show people the biases and the tics that you have in your own mind that make you resistant to change, or that alter, or that I would say create misjudgments and miscalculations and just bias in general. And so understanding those is important because, well, it's important for a lot of reasons. One reason is that I think it makes you more empathetic with other people. So you look back at your past self, and I would say most people weren't vegan for life, right? So when you were a non-vegan, you probably gave some of these excuses. These biases were probably operating in your own mind. And so to understand that and have a name on it, I think really helps you to get in the other person's head. Because once you are vegan, it's easy to forget that you had those same biases or you were like engaging with those same fallacies before. And so I want to keep those at the forefront of your mind. Like, yes, you also had this bias. You also used this fallacy. And furthermore, you're still biased and still using fallacies, almost certainly.
Yeah.
The appeal to nature fallacy is just the most pervasive fallacy there is. And vegans still do appeal to nature fallacies. Like I still see vegans do it, even after being able to so like eloquently express why it's bad, for a non-vegan to do it. And this is kind of what I talk too about, like this like teaching frame. Like if you watch Earthling Ed videos and he just says, well, lions will eat their babies, do you think that's good? Obviously, like appeal to nature. It's, if all you memorize is that little soundbite, but you don't connect deeply with why this reasoning is fallacious, then you will probably eventually engage in that reasoning, right? Yeah. And then, so, I mean, there's a couple bad things about that, right? Like just we don't want to engage in fallacious reasoning. Presumably we want to know what's true and we want to operate in the world knowing the most true things. But it also leaves you vulnerable to like a counterattack in an argument where maybe you engage in an appeal to nature and so maybe the person's like, hey, didn't you just say just because it's natural, it wasn't like, that doesn't just make it good because it's natural, right? Mm-hmm. And so then you get this like, oh, look, vegans do this too. And then what people do is like, oh, see, vegans, they're just like, there's no difference between me and vegans. They just do the same shit.
Complete dismissal, the shut down.
Yeah. And that's like crop deaths too, right? Crop deaths is another thing of like, oh, see, look, they did a bad thing too. So, okay, we're all bad. So, I mean, whatever, who can draw a line anywhere? Lines are so fuzzy. It's so weird. Everyone does bad stuff.
What I'm interested in is what your best outreach experience has been. And I guess this hinges on how you define best, but yeah, what would that be?
There's definitely a temporal bias here because this one happened recently. Mm-hmm. I think probably the one I put up fairly recently on my YouTube channel where I'm talking to a woman and she just reacts. At the end, I find out that she was, I think, a communications major or something. And her and I just had like a really, really like empathetic, honest, like not a lot of fallacies, not a lot of defensiveness, just a very open and honest conversation. And it just went so swimmingly. And at the end, I tried something that I had been nervous about trying, particularly with where I live. And it ended up going pretty well. So the first couple of questions I asked her were about, is it okay to like kill and enslave a human? You know what I mean? Questions around killing and enslavement. And, of course, I ask her a bunch of questions. She says no to all of them. And I say, okay, like, do you eat cows, pigs, chickens, fish, chicken eggs, cow's milk? And she says, yes. And like, she's like, oh. And I'm like, do you think those animals are killed or enslaved? And she kind of like starts to go off on a tangent. I bring her back. I say, well, hold on. That's not quite what I was asking. Like, do you think they're killed? She's like, well, yeah, obviously. And I was like, do you think they're enslaved by your definition? Because I had asked her for a definition earlier. And she was like, well, by my definition, I guess, yes. I guess they are enslaved. You know what I mean? Like, it was like she didn't want to say it, but she was an honest communicator. And she's like, based on the thing I just said, and then like what happens to animals, like that would constitute enslavement. So I showed her a video and all these things, and we had a pretty good chat. And at the end, I said to her, I told her that these things I showed you, like pigs in gas chambers. I told her about chicks in blenders. And I explained to her that these things are just symptoms of a deeper disease. And the disease is that we commodify and objectify these animals, that we fundamentally see them as someone or something, not someone, right? And I just pointed out to her, like, if you think back through history, every time we've seen someone and said they're a something, those someones always get fucked. And I said that to her, and it just like really hit her. You know what I mean? Like it seemed to just like hit her like a Mack truck, you know? And I was really nervous saying that. And I was nervous bringing up enslavement as well. And since then, I went on tour with ASAP, the group I was talking about earlier. And I used that line over and over. And to pretty much unanimously good reactions, I would say. Mm-hmm. Pretty much no one got mad at it. Now, maybe they got mad afterwards or were like, that was inappropriate. But no one got mad in the moment. And a lot of people were like that sort of reaction. Like not quite like her. Like she was like really like bowled over by it, but definitely like you could feel like the knife twisting a little bit, you know, the moral, the ethical knife twisting. And so I think that was one of my best interactions recently, because I think it's important to have this dichotomy of like symptom and disease. This metaphor I think is really powerful, because I think it puts to bed very quickly this idea of, well, what if we treat them nicely? Or like, well, what about crop deaths? You know what I mean? And so like, because like one way, for instance, you can tackle crop deaths is to say like, what actually looks like more animals are killed in the crop production in animal agriculture because of how many crops they're fed. And we can go through, we can do it with grass fed, we can do it, you know, with chickens, with soy, with corn, whatever, however we want to do it. We can talk about that they're fed leftovers or waste or whatever. And we can take it at every angle, and it still kind of looks like not so great on just the pure numbers front. But even if it were the case, like let's say it were the case that eating grass-fed cows cause less crop deaths or whatever, it would still fundamentally be viewing animals as mere objects.
Yeah.
You know? And so as long as that idea is like kindling in our minds, they're never going to be fully liberated. They just won't be. And so these more shallow or myopic like number counting exercises, while they are interesting, and while we do, I think, want to obviously mitigate crop deaths for all sorts of reasons, ultimately they don't address the core issue. You know, like if I could just eat cows and cause less crop deaths, right? I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that even if it caused less crop deaths, because fundamentally, right, I haven't dismantled that idea in my mind that animals are objects if I'm eating them. You know, I can say I have. I can, in a very like superficial way, be like, oh no, I totally don't see them as objects. I'm doing this because I've done this like very, you know, mathematical calculation and blah, blah, blah. But ultimately it's, you know, it's bullshit, to use a pun here, right? So yeah, I think that's, and I think what this video did is it allowed me to tie those symptoms into the disease, because I think that too, you don't just want to talk about the disease, or at least I don't think you just want to talk about the disease. Because you can say like, well, yeah, like we objectify them, we commodify them, we treat them as something, not someone. You know, and people are like, yeah, that's bad. Like, obviously that doesn't seem like a good thing. Most people are going to agree with that. But I don't know that it provides, without knowing exactly what happens to the animals, I don't know if that provides as much of a gut punch. So like, I think of it like, imagine that, you know, you have a tumor, right? Maybe you have a tumor in your arm right now. You have it for the next 20 years. It's a benign tumor. Mm-hmm. Okay. You have it. That's a disease, right? Right. Like maybe it's doing something very minor to you, mm-hmm. right? Maybe it makes like your arm gets slightly more tired. Your right arm gets slightly more tired or something. So this very minor symptom, you have this disease. Or you have a tumor, you're in an immense amount of pain, right? What's going to motivate you to go to the doctor more?
Obviously,
right?
The pain, yeah.
Or you go to the doctor, he's like, oh, this is a benign tumor. I can take it out. There's some risks, but like, it's really just going to cause your arm to get a little more tired every once in a while. Or you go to the doctor and they're like, hey, you're going to be dead in like 3 weeks if we don't take this out, right? What are you going to be more motivated mm-hmm. to get that treatment? You know, what's going to motivate you more to get that treatment? And so I think this is important. It's important to understand that the symptoms are horrible. gas chambers, macerators, forced impregnation, stealing babies. These are horrible symptoms. And I think those symptoms being so horrible helps give us that motivational push to be like, damn, I really need to do something. You know what I mean? But it shows you that merely treating the symptoms isn't the answer. So like in the same way, like if you have this tumor, right, that's going to kill you in 3 weeks, and your doctor, she's like, well, here, I can just give you these painkillers. You're going to be like, yeah, that's great. Those painkillers definitely help the symptoms, but I'm going to die in 3 weeks. So like, I would like you to give me the painkillers, but also just cut out the tumor. And so I think this metaphor just works really well. Both from just a like, general debate standpoint, I think it makes the point quite well. But I think from a rhetorical standpoint too, I think it's sort of easy to understand, and I think people get it. You know, or you can tell me. I don't know. Did that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, a sense of urgency. Yeah, is definitely prevalent. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the symptoms are the urgency. The symptoms give that moral urgency, that behavioral urgency to go and like do something about this. But without addressing the root cause of the disease, those symptoms are just going to keep persisting in one way or another. Maybe they go away for a little bit, but they'll always come back. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about your best outreach experience just now. It'd be interesting to know, just for fun, what your worst outreach experience has been and what you might have learned from it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I've had some like fiery ones that I left feeling really dejected and really angry, and like I couldn't turn down afterwards. You know what I mean? I was just like at 100 after that. And so those tend to be pretty bad. It's standard stuff, bullet biting, you know, like I think I asked someone if like, what did I ask them at one point? Like if you basically genocided a bunch of babies or a bunch of aliens, like, would that be okay? And they were like, yeah, that would be fine. And I'm like, I know you don't think that.
Yeah, come on.
Like, cause they were going down the right with like, oh, they're not as smart as us. I was like, okay, so what about if it was, you know, babies or aliens or something? I think I said babies and they were like, well, not humans. I said, okay, aliens. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. I was like, so like, okay, when you're watching like sci-fi movies, you just totally don't care if like the aliens get genocide in those movies. You're like, yeah. So there was like one like that. I think that was pretty, that left me like pretty angry afterwards. I've had a bunch that were like health related, and I didn't used to know how to deal with the health related question very well. Not, oh, I don't think people can be healthy, but like I specifically tried it and wasn't healthy. That can be a really frustrating conversation because it puts you in an odd situation where you have to like get into their health history, which is like never really a place you want to go.
Yeah, it's never going to
you don't
feel
want to start
appropriate.
interrogating.
Yeah.
Right. Like, well, okay, what did you supplement with? Did you use this? Did you just, well, tell me exactly what you ate. You know what I mean? Because like without that, you can't really know. And so that like I tried it and it didn't work is always really awkward. Because they also always have this sort of, I guess, empirical or like data advantage over you, or putatively they do, because they know what they did and you don't. So you can only speculate as to what they did. And anything you say, well, did you do this? They can always be like, oh yeah, I definitely did that. You know what I mean? Well, did you do B12? They're like, B12. Yep. 100%. You know, so it's like, so now I tend not to actually focus on the actual health aspect of it when they bring up the health. I turn more to like, you know, if it were the case that you felt like, you know, that you had to eat humans, right? And you had to try to figure out a way to not eat humans, right? Do you think you'd give it another shot? Do you think there are resources you could go to? Like if you had to eat plant-based right now, or like your mom or your sister or your dad was going to get killed, you know, like something like that. Like if you really had to do it, do you think you could do it? Do you think there's a way you could figure it out? And so I kind of try to plant that in their minds that they could actually do it if they really wanted to. You know what I mean? And then sometimes I'll also just be like, okay, well, let me just tell you the other stuff that happens. And I'll just go into it more like, here's what happens to, you know, pigs and cows. Another thing I'll sometimes ask in those situations is like, okay, if you could be healthy, would you eat a plant-based diet? Would you be vegan? You know? And another thing I'll ask, which usually is the thing that really like puts the lie to it, is sometimes I'll be like, oh, okay, well, you know, I definitely think you probably could do it. There are some resources. I would check that out more, but let's table that. Because we can still keep talking about this, right? So like, do you wear wool or leather or, you know what I mean? Or silk or anything like that? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, that doesn't have to do with your health at all. So you could get rid of those, right? And that's when like almost every time I've talked to someone who claims it was about health and I say that to them, they're like, well, I mean, it's just a secondary product. And I'm like, okay, so the health thing is, that's not it. It
Yeah.
ain't it. So yeah, so those I think tend to be like the most frustrating for me is the health ones that like I had a personal health problem and therefore I can't do it because it's really hard to maneuver those, I think.
Yeah, and I think it
Yeah.
puts people in a really like difficult space where they feel like you're acting like you know them more than they know themselves, and that is just
Mm-hmm.
never a place you want to be. It's
Yeah.
like that's so hard to navigate.
Yeah.
I've got an exercise now. It's an interesting one. Obviously, given what you do, what you focus on, you know that it's going to take more than this time to convince someone to go vegan. But say you did just have 30 seconds to convince someone to go vegan, what would you say to them?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of like what I said earlier with the symptoms and the disease. If I can squeeze it into 30 seconds, I'll hit the gas chambers and the macerators and all that. But I will end with like, and I just want to let you know, all these things are symptoms of a greater disease. And the disease is that we commodify and objectify animals, and that we fundamentally see them as something, not someone. And then I just hit them with that line again. Every time in history that we viewed someone as something, those someones get. So I'd end it with that, and I'd squeeze in as much of those symptoms as I could in the beginning. I think I would probably just focus on a single animal to make the point. Pigs have been my go-to in the past because I think a lot of people now, especially because of this John Oliver skit, they actually have this little bit of information downloaded into their brain, which is great, which is that pigs are as smart. I can't remember if he said pigs are as smart as a dog, or I think he said pigs are about as smart as a 3-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the line he actually said on the show. And so now, like I've talked to a bunch of people recently on this college campus, and they brought up that fact. They're like, yeah, well, pigs are as smart as like a 3-year-old. And so I'm like now hearing that as part of the zeitgeist. And so I think pigs probably a good, like if you can only talk about one animal, you got a short amount of time. I think pigs probably a pretty good one because of that. Not that intelligence matters, but people use people use intelligence as a proxy for something that matters. And so, yeah, I think I would go with pigs. I would be like, do you know what happens to them? And I tell them about the tail clipping, the teeth clipping. One thing a lot of activists don't talk about, and I don't know if it's because it's uncomfortable because it's so horrific and disgusting, or I don't know why, but pigs have their testicles cut off. Male pigs, pretty much every male pig has their testicles cut off for basically 2 reasons, partially to control breeding. Sometimes I've heard reasons of aggression, but primarily to change the taste of their flesh.
Yeah.
Because when they have their balls, their flesh apparently tastes worse. And that fact and the gas chamber of pigs are the 2 that I noticed really, really hit people hard, particularly when I've been doing the ASAP tour. Like when I say, do you know why we cut off a pig's testicles? And the person will be like, no, I don't. And I've been saying, because they don't mate when they want to mate. They mate when we tell them they can mate, which most of the time is never.
Yeah.
So, and that line also really gets a really good, like, oof. You know what I mean? Like it's something about, I think the gore and the like gas chambers that obviously gas chambers are evocative of other times in history that everyone agrees are really bad. But there's something about this power and this taking away of freedom in such a like domineering and I don't know, almost like I guess like a colonialist way that I felt was like really landing with people when I said they don't breed or mate or whatever word I use. Depends on who's there. Sometimes I'll say, but it kind of depends on the vibe of the person, which like particular verb I use there. But I say they don't do it when they want to do it. They do it when we tell them they can do it. And because that's really what it is. That's what it comes down to, is that we're in total control over them. Mm-hmm. And that really hits people hard. And so I think, yeah, I don't, in 30 seconds, I don't know what I'd say. In 30 seconds, I would probably go with pigs. I'd tell them about the breeding, the testicles, the gas chambers, and I'd probably try to round it out with the disease.
Yeah, I think the testicles is a really poignant one to bring up because it's like showing just how horrific not only does it cause a visceral reaction, like even if you don't have testicles, like, well, I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like I can feel it. I'm like, like it makes me clench. And it's simply because we want them to taste better. So it's really demonstrating just how far we're willing to mutilate them in order to get our way. And as you say, the the empowerment over them that we have, like exercising that when it comes to what you said, you know, just like breeding when we want them to breed. It just shows how dystopian and monstrous that we are actually being to these animals. And yeah, the monstrosities that we're committing to animals are so vast, and we need people like yourself speaking up. So if you had a short amount of time, perhaps 30 seconds or a bit longer, to convince someone to be active for the animals, what would you say to them?
This will probably be somewhat controversial. In short periods of time, and honestly just in general, I think analogies tend to be very powerful cognitive and motivational tools. And so I would draw analogies to other situations. Specifically here, I would draw analogies to social justice situations in the past, and probably specifically either like women's right to vote or slavery or something like that. Something that is like a slam dunk. So part of the reason people think that those things are brought up to add shock value, but that's not the reason to bring them up.
No.
There's a couple reasons to bring them up. One is because pretty much everyone agrees that these were like moral atrocities, right? Or just like absolutely like unfair. You know what I mean? In like the deepest sense of the word. Like, I don't think many people are sitting around being like, wow, I think that women, we probably should take away the right to vote. Although on the internet, you can find them.
Yeah, you really can.
You can definitely find those people. But in my normal day-to-day life, I don't meet anyone who's like, women shouldn't have the right to vote, right? I don't meet anyone who's like, slavery, I don't know, it wasn't that bad,
Yeah.
you know? And so one thing is just like, these are just widely agreed upon as bad, right? And the other thing is that like, people widely understand is that people living back in those times were largely, or at some point, before it really caught momentum, were largely on the side of the moral atrocity, or were at least indifferent to it, right? Like they at least think, slavery, it's not that bad. I mean, maybe it's not great, but I mean, what are you going to do? You know, like that was like, people understand that like if 80% of people were against slavery, slavery wouldn't have been a thing. So like loaded into the fact that this is bad, you also understand that most people living then were for it. Now, the thing that I think most people don't understand is that if you were living back then, you probably would have been pro-slavery. You probably would have, well, if you were a woman, I don't think you would have been against the right to vote. Although I'm sure that was a thing too.
Yeah, it was a thing. Yeah.
So, you know, if you were living back in that time, you kind of have this sort of ethical inertia where you kind of just absorb the values of everyone around you, you know. And so I think those analogies are powerful for at least those two reasons. Trying to convince someone to get active for the animals, I would just ask them to imagine that they lived during that time, or even that they had like time traveled back to that time right now. So they have their current sensibilities, right? You go back into the 1800s. I assume that you're not going to buy products made by slaves. I assume you're going to try to avoid those products. I assume if you have a friend and you go over to their house and they literally have enslaved people in their house, you're probably not going to go over to their house and let the enslaved person like wait on you. Okay. You know, most of us agree with that. But is that all you're going to do? Are you going to like say anything? Are you going to talk to people and be like, hey, maybe you shouldn't have enslaved people? Are you going to like, well, you can't make YouTube videos. Are you going to write articles? Are you going to write to the local newspaper? Are you maybe going to stand on the street? Are you going to talk to your local politicians? Like, are you going to do anything else? Are you just going to not participate in it? You know what I mean? And I think, you know, in the same, you just look back in any of these points in history, because if you're vegan, you've understood that animals deserve to be in our circle of moral concern. You understand, and in a real way, not in this like superficial, like purely welfarist way, right? Like they really need to be in our circle of moral concern in a genuine, deep way, in the same way, you know, or at least in a similar way that humans are, but probably in the same way that humans are. And so I would just ask them that, like, if they could go back in time, would they merely not participate, or would they fight for abolition? Would they fight for the right for women to vote? You know what I mean? Would they fight for civil rights? Another thing I would possibly say to them, I really like this analogy, which is if you were walking down the street and someone started beating a dog, right? You kind of have three options. You can do nothing. You can go up and try to stop the person, or you can join in and start beating the dog. And I think that a lot of people, before hearing that, they sort of inherently think that veganism is like stepping in and fighting the person off the animal. But veganism isn't that. Veganism is just walking by.
Yeah.
Veganism is walking by and saying nothing. Veganism is merely not participating in this super direct exploitation, right? And I think many people also don't understand that non-veganism would be like joining in the exploitation, right? Like, or it actually would be more like paying the person to continue to beat the dog.
Yeah.
Right. And I think when you see it in those direct terms where it's not so abstract, it's not 100 miles away, it's not behind some slaughterhouse wall. When you view it in a very like one-to-one interaction, it just becomes so obvious, right? You're not going to just walk by. That's not the only thing you're going to do. Or maybe you would, I don't know. Maybe there are some people who would, but I don't think most people want to think that they're that person. And especially people who have already gone vegan. I imagine they already have a somewhat, I don't know, more pronounced moral compass at this point in their lives than other people. And so I don't think that given that situation, you would just walk by. So if you wouldn't walk by, why wouldn't you get active? Because someone beating a dog, that's happening a billion times over, and except way worse. Like a dog getting beat is really bad, but is it as bad as them getting their testicles cut out or being put in a gas chamber? Like this is like, and so like I just don't think in a one-to-one situation like that, anyone who calls themselves a vegan is going to just walk by. Maybe you'd tackle the person, maybe you'd yell at them to stop, maybe you'd go get someone else because you don't think you could stop them, but you'd do something. You wouldn't just walk by. And yeah, so if you're not walking by, then I think you should be getting active.
Really great responses, Justin. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Vegan FTA. This is Debug Your Brain, everyone. Please make sure to subscribe over on his channel because you're truly missing out if you aren't already subscribed. But thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.